The audio review starts at the next image. This is the summary chart I had at the end of my PowerPoint, but it wasn't at yours. It's meant to help ID what makes something truly pop and what is something else, which I refer to as Italian modern. In general, design can be called pop if it's been influenced by an aspect of popular culture. Very simple. And many of those are outlined in the first half of the lecture, where I talk about life in America during the 50s and 60s. Reflecting the tenor of the times, pop design is usually colorful and often playful, as well as meant to be discarded and replaced rapidly with changing tastes and fashions or just on impulse. But I think you'll notice that the tone shifts in the second half of the lecture, from Gioponti onward. Italian modern design feels more serious. It often has an intellectual or theoretical basis. Why? It has to do with the source of influence and the context. While surrealist-inspired designs can have an amusing quality, surrealism is, generally speaking, more serious than pop art, meaning there's more intellectualizing behind it. And the Italian architects and designers of this era were quite caught up in that. There was much discussion and theorizing about design, which resulted, as you saw, in the rise of conceptual design, anti-architecture, and groups like Superstudio. So that was just some clarification in case any had a question about the difference between pop and other forms of Italian design. But don't worry about that for the exam. What matters is that you can recognize certain characteristics and their cause. What makes the spotty chair such a perfect example of pop design? What about the form? What about the ornament, the material, the production? I will tell you that the first three are the most important. This certainly doesn't look anything like a chair. Why? What is it shaped like? What is it referencing? How does this form reflect the values of pop art? What is the ornament, the big circles? What inspired that? What is the material and why? What statement is being made by using such material? The Donna Up chair is colorful and fun, and the source of inspiration is in pop culture, although it's a somewhat serious source. What inspired this chair? And again, it's not a traditional chair. Why? A final point. Why is it referred to as an up chair? Why do I call this a psychedelic interior? What does that mean? Where does that term come from, and how is it expressed here? What other elements do we see here that reflect what's happening in pop culture at the moment? I think the immediate visual difference between the previous image and this one illustrates the point I made at the opening about Italian modern design not being as colorful and fun as pop. And if you recall the discussion of Molino from class, if you consult your notes, you know how hard he in particular is to categorize. His furniture may draw upon diverse sources of influence, but the overall aesthetic of his interior points clearly to surrealism. Paintings hanging on drapery, a fireplace raised too high above the floor, and the odd kitschy found object on the mantel. The blown-up snapshot as a work of art, or better yet, as wallpaper. His own chair like a strange living creature inhabiting the space. All create a very uncomfortable, somewhat bizarre atmosphere. Do we have a formal stylistic term to define this? A surrealist interior, yes, but a term that allows us to understand it in time, place, and culture. I think the best we can do is the umbrella term Italian modernism. And speaking of surrealism, this lamp is a great example of the surrealist found object concept applied to design. We saw the famous example of Marcel Duchamp doing that with a bicycle wheel. An ordinary, everyday, possibly discarded object is raised to the level of art, or in this case design, by isolating it, thereby calling attention to it and making it special. And if you're wondering what makes this different than, say, a baseball glove turned into a chair, that is different than pop, the simple answer would be that it's not a fun, colorful item meant to be discarded in the not too distant future. And it helps to know who the designers and manufacturers were and what their intentions were. The Castigliones approached their work from a totally different place than pop designers.